Hello, and welcome to Intro to Sociology. This conversation is on Chapter 6. We're chatting about groups today. So, I want to give us a definition of groups, but first let's start with what a group is not. If a collection of people happen to be in the same place at the same time, that's a collection of people, right? I mean, we may see five or six people waiting on a bus, and we might think, oh, look at that group of people waiting on a bus. It's fine to say that, but in sociology, that's not a group, right? In sociology, that's just a collection of people who happen to be in the same place at the same time. A group, on the other hand, there's some history, and we're not going to go crazy in our definition for this, but there's some history between the group. There's some identity between the group, meaning that there's been some period of time that they've known each other. There's no trick questions on this on the test. I just want you to know, for it to be a group, there needs to be some sense of a relationship between the people present. There's a few basic kinds of groups. One, I want you to be able to differentiate between an in-group and an out-group. This is pretty straightforward. An in-group, those are groups that we feel comfortable in, right? When you show up, you're like, this feels right to me. An out group, on the other hand, is when you've joined a collection and you think you're going to be part of the group, and then you realize very quickly, I don't have anything in common with these people. This is going in the wrong direction. That's an out group, right? So each of us have experienced that in one fashion or another. On the exam, I'm going to ask you to differentiate between primary groups and secondary groups. Let's start with the second one. Let's start with secondary groups. Secondary groups are more formal. So if you're in a board meeting and people are using Robert's Rule of Order, which simply means people are making motions and seconding things, or you're in a committee meeting or a team meeting, those are secondary groups, right? I mean, we're a little more formal with each other. We're not as revealing about personal issues or personal thoughts. This is more work, more business kind of related. Primary groups, on the other hand, are very different. Primary groups are people who we feel very comfortable with. We don't have to pretend we're smarter than we are. We don't have to pretend life is going better than it is. In a primary group, these are best friends and family. These are people who they take us for who we are, right? I mean, they're comfortable with who we are. We're comfortable with who they are. We can have primary relationships within a secondary group. So we can be in a board meeting with someone who's a best friend. It's just during the board meeting, we're not very likely to act very chummy, right? It's the second the meeting is over, we are, but during the meeting, we're typically a little more formal. Not always, but typically. But I want you to understand the difference between the two kinds of groups. Another group I want you to be familiar with are reference groups. Now, whether you recognize you have these or not, you do. If you want to know how your life is going, are you doing well financially? Are you doing well academically? Are you progressing at the rate you thought you would be progressing? Oftentimes, we refer to reference groups. It's fairly common for us to compare ourselves to people who might be a step or two above where we are, and just to check to see, are we on track. For your first job, you might ask your boss, hey, how old were you, when you became the boss, right? So we just want to know, are we on track? And so we use reference groups for that. On the exam, I'm going to ask you to differentiate between two different kinds of leaders: transformational leaders and transactional leaders. These types of leaders are very different. Let's start with transactional. Transactional leaders are people, they're oftentimes middle managers, but they're people who get things done. If you have a boss that you don't like because they pay way too much attention to what time you come in or what time you leave or how much you're getting done or what time you go to lunch and what time you get back, it's probably a transactional leader. Transactional leaders are really good at meeting deadlines and getting things done and making sure that the trains run on time, as it were. That's a transactional leader. Transformational leaders typically can't be bothered with all the detail that transactional leaders go for. Transformational leaders, big picture, right? They don't want to get bogged down with details. So, a really good transformational leader would have been John F. Kennedy, right? John F. Kennedy, when he made the announcement in the early 60s that the US, by the end of the 60s, would put a person on the moon. And look, part of the reason he said that is the former Soviet Union's Sputnik space program was leaps and bounds ahead of the US. And he was challenging NASA to catch up and pass the Soviet Union. And so when President Kennedy made the announcement that the US was going to put a person on the moon, I mean, he had no business saying that. You all have heard this before. I'm just going to say it again. The cell phone in your pocket has more power than the computers that they were using to figure out the logistics of getting people to the moon. I mean, it's just absolutely, it's kind of crazy that it worked, right? So it's a good thing. But Kennedy couldn't be bothered with the details, right? He wasn't interested in how it was going to happen, or he just wanted to lay it out, and then other people would take care of it. So that's the difference between a transformational leader and a transactional leader. I will say, oftentimes transformational leaders need transactional leaders working for them, right? Because they need someone to carry out the tasks that they have said that we're going to do. So you oftentimes we'll see a convergence there. As long as we're talking about groups, we need to talk about conformity. One of the things that's inherent within being human is we like for people to conform. We like for people to get along with each other, to agree with each other. Not that we're agreeing very much in the United States right now, but we do prefer it when people get along. There is let me take us off for just a moment. What I would like you to do, and it's on YouTube, Dr. Stanley Milgram in 1962 at Yale University. The video is now owned by Penn State. But Dr. Stanley Milgram did an experiment with electric shocks, and I put it in quotes because there were no electric shocks. But it was done in 1962, and it was really to see how obedient people would be when given a direct order, right? And so it was illuminating how how many people in our population would carry out orders that could very well result in the death of someone else. So if you get a chance, please watch that particular video. It's awesome, right? I mean, the full video is like 40 some minutes. There's probably a 10 or 12-minute highlight that's out there somewhere, but these are really good. But let's talk about the Ash experiment. So this has been done tens of thousands of times in college classes across the country. Here's how the Ash experiment went. You have an overhead. It's overhead number 8. It's called Figure 6.2, and you have 2 slides of lines. And here's how it went. You think you're in an experiment with 6 or 7 other people. But you're really not. You're the experiment. Everyone else is in on it. So you'll have a facilitator like me put a line up on the board, and then put other lines up on the board and ask which line is closest in length to the first line. And the first 5 or 6 times through, it's going to be real obvious which lines are the closest. And so everyone's going to say that line. I mean, you might even be starting to think, oh my gosh, this is boring. I can't believe I signed up for this. But the 6th or 7th time through, no one says the correct line the rest of the time. Now, they all say the same line, but they all choose the incorrect line. And what they're testing is whether you will choose the incorrect line at least once just to go along with the group. Now, here's what we know. 75% of us, 3 out of 4, will choose the incorrect line at least once just to go along with the group. That's how strong conformity is within our species. And I know what you're thinking. It's the other three people that would do that. You never would. That's awesome. Good for you. But it's a really illuminating experiment. Again, that's been done tens of thousands of times, and it teaches us that conformity is extremely strong within our species. Okay. I skipped ahead to slide 14, physical settings of organizations. Again, I'm just hitting the highlights here. Harper's an interesting campus. I think I've said this before. I've taught here for about 30 years. Wow, it's amazing to think that I've been here so long. When I first started teaching at Harper, there was a tiny sidewalk that went from A building to J building. I teach most of my classes in J building. And back then, if you were, if you and another person were walking towards each other, um, one or both of you had to put one foot into the grass as you passed each other because the sidewalk was not big enough. Well, that started to kill the grass. And then Harper put up signs that said, don't walk on the grass. And they put up the little snow fencing, right, to get people not to do it. And then Harper did a very smart thing. They widened, right? They widened the sidewalk, and now I don't even know if you could call it a sidewalk. There's an expanse of cement and brick and asphalt, right? So it's just screw it. Let's just give people all kinds of room to walk. But organizations have typically made decisions top down, is really what I'm saying, and so companies or institutions like Harper, the people on top would make decisions for everyone else, right? And then as it related to surveillance, what we see in an awful lot of organizations is you'll have a manager stationed in a room separated from everyone else, but with a glass window where they can watch everyone else work, right? And that encourages everyone who's working that you can't slough off. Is that a word? You can't slough off because the boss can watch you. So we've seen an awful lot of environments set up in this way. We've had some changes in this. I'm jumping ahead to, and then I'm going to jump back, but I'm jumping ahead to slide number 19. The Japanese model, which was brought to the US in the 70s, inverted that. And so it was an inverted pyramid. And so the idea being that when you build an institution such as Harper with multiple buildings, the idea is don't put in any sidewalks. Just leave the grass and then wait. And what people will do is they will find the most efficient path to where they need to go between buildings, whatever. Then put the sidewalks in where the people walk. Doesn't that make a whole lot of sense? Rather than putting in sidewalks, making people walk in a certain way, which doesn't work. The Japanese model is to invert that. Don't put the sidewalks in and let people find their own path. Then build the sidewalks there, right? So that's it's a really interesting way. It's a really interesting way of talking about the same thing. We're going to talk multiple times this semester about gender issues, right? We actually have an entire chapter on gender issues, and we continue to see gender issues within the workplace. We see it within academia, we see it within the workplace. We continue to see sexual harassment. And so I want everyone to understand the most basic kind of sexual harassment. And the most basic kind is quid pro quo. Quid pro quo. And what that means is, you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And what it normally is a young female will have to do something sexual for her older boss, and then he'll promise her a raise or a promotion or something like that. That's quid pro quo, right? So that's the most common type of sexual harassment. And it doesn't even always have to be spelled out because people are getting kind of sneaky with this stuff. So you're not going to see emails anymore or text messages that lay all this out, but it'll be implied, right? And so people will be able to read between the lines. And so we continue to see these kinds of issues in the workplace. And it's not always between men and women, right? I mean, now Now we see same-sex sexual harassment. We probably always have. Now it's just coming to the fore more than it used to. Another thing I want to talk about is the McDonaldization of society. And this has nothing to do with buying cheeseburgers, right? Well, not really. So here's how the McDonaldization of society or the workplace goes. Now, in the olden days, you would go in and you would buy a cheeseburger, and they would tell you how much the cheeseburger was, and you would give them $1, they would say it was 50 cents, and then they would give you 50 cents back. We all know that's not how it works anymore. Now, when you go in, you give an order, and the person taking the order is not punching numbers into a cash machine. They are pressing things like a picture of a cheeseburger, and then the computer tells them the cost. And then whether you're paying via credit card, debit card, or cash, they're also punching that into the computer, and then that tells them what to do. So what's happened is the math skills needed to be a cashier are significantly lower than they were 10 to 15 years ago. 10 to 15 years ago, you had to be able to count change back to someone. Those days are long gone. Now you just do what the machine tells you to do. That's the McDonaldization. And so what that means is it's taking job skills and lessening those job skills. And I'll give you a hint. The fewer job skills that it takes to do a particular job, the less pay for that job, right? And what I mean by that is the more people that can do a particular job, the more people who can do it, the lower the pay. The fewer people who can do a particular job, the higher the pay. So what the McDonaldization of America means is taking jobs that had some skills attached to it, lessening those skills, and in turn, people will be paid less money because now more people can do that particular job. We've seen this all across the board. As a matter of fact, where you do your grocery shopping, um, when I can, I go through self-checkout, right? Now, it's not uncommon for there to be an issue, but someone comes over and deals with it quickly, and I feel like I'm out the door quicker that way. Well, that's someone who isn't working, right? So technology is taking care of that. When you call Harper College, someone doesn't answer the phone, right? You get the automated attendant first, and we all know that. So we all know to press 0, although now automated attendants don't always get you where you want to go to somebody live. So a lot of the old tricks don't work anymore, and it's cheaper for companies to have technology be the answer than it is to have people handling those phones. And so that's the McDonaldization of America. So the conclusion of this is that I want you to understand that groups have a lot to do with how we interact with each other. For those of you who go on in sociology, a really fun class to take is social psychology. And the great thing with social psychology is you're really studying the impact of groups on individual decision making, right? And groups have a lot to do with individual decision making, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's at school, whether it's in the family, whether it's with your friends. And those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. So have a tremendous day, and I will see you soon.